it better. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start this out with the rectangle. That'll be the front of the box. I better start this a little bit darker than that so that we can see it. See that? HB, so you guys should be using your lightest pencil. You always want to start with your lightest pencil. Yeah, paper, sorry, because you weren't here, so I didn't give you paper. HB, lightest, what page? So hit sync. I just put this out, and it should be at the bottom and say tissue box. Sorry about that. I had it in the H bell, and I thought I had it up for you guys too, but I did not. I apologize. Okay, so go ahead and hit sync. You won't necessarily need to see the detail for this part, so you can look at this. I'll let you know when you're going to need the detail, okay? And remind me, if I don't say anything, remind me, and I'll have you guys hit sync again, okay? All right. So so you guys can see the tissue box in general right now, right? You can see that on my screen. So that's what we're drawing. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to start out with this rectangle that's going to be in front. So you want to try to make this roughly the proportions that you're seeing. And I'm putting it a little bit to the right side of my page to leave room for the shadow over here. And we're going to need room for this top plane and for the tissue. So when we finish this up, since you guys are not able to see the page yet, it's going to look something like this when we finish this up. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the top plane. And I want to look at how big do I want that to be. So I can be measuring that. You can use your pencil to measure that. I'm going to come up to the board, which Ashley won't be able to see, but I'm measuring how big is this, and then how many times does that go into this. So anyone watching the video won't be able to see this part, but same as we did before, I'm looking at how big is this top plane, and then moving that down and going 1, 2.5. So you guys can hold out your pencil, close one eye, and kind of compare that. See how big that would be. So 1, 2.5. So I think I got that in pretty much the right place. Once I have that in the right place, then I can start to look at and measure these angles. All right, so I like to think of this as sort of a triangle that helps me see it, but what you're just trying to really see is that angle. So whatever way that works for you. For me, kind of thinking about it like that, and kind of drawing that triangle, and then so this part up here I'm going to erase, but I kind of think about it as part of that triangle, and that helps me see it better. So I'm looking at the shape of the negative space, if you will. So that's going to come up again later. And then I'm going to have pretty much the same thing going on here. So my photo is not exactly symmetrical, but I was trying to make my photo symmetrical. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to go for symmetry over here for this box, because it just makes some of the stuff to come easier if these are pretty much symmetrical. If they're a little bit off, it's okay, because again, they are in the photo as well. That's not a big deal. All right, and then you want to look at the overall shape. And I'm actually thinking, mine seems a little squat. Maybe I need to move this up a little bit more and see how that affects things. So again, I can look at the measurements. How many times does this height, does this measurement go in across the box? So again, you can hold that up, try that out. So I would be going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and maybe a little bit. Sorry, I know my head was kind of in the way, but you can kind of do that by squinting one eye. Okay, so I'm doing that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I need to make this a little bit longer / shorter that way. Yeah, maybe that'll work because I don't want to mess up my proportions the other way. All right, so you can also kind of eyeball this. So however works best for you to get it looking like what you see in the photo. All right, so go ahead and make whatever adjustments you need to make now. So whenever we're working on a drawing, we're going from big to small in the sense that you want to get these big proportions and big shapes right and then work on the details. All right, so if I keep going, is that too fast? Or do you want me to pause a second? Pause a second? Okay. Yep. Too far to the right? No, you're good, because like you're gonna want for the shadows. Yeah, no, I think that's good, because this so Wilson was asking about the proportions. I think this is looking good, because he's gonna have, I wouldn't want to make it any bigger than this, but he'll have just enough room for most of the shadow, maybe all the shadow, and for the tissue. So I would say it's probably better for it to be that big than like teensy tiny, all right? So you wouldn't want to make it really any bigger than that, probably. Only make the tissue a little. And at this point, remember, you want these lines to be very light. And notice, I did not use a straight edge yet. You don't want to use a straight edge until you have the proportion. But you don't want to do the straight edge until you have this correct, because that's going to get frustrating. So notice I did not start out with the straight edge. Once you have this the way you want it, then you want to use the straight edge. And when you're doing that, you can also look to line this up with the edges of the page if you think that the paper is cut correctly, is cut straight. So sometimes when I hand cut it, it comes out a little bit wonky, but this was not hand cut. This was pre-cut, and I think this is good. So I'm going to go ahead. And so notice how I'm lining this up with the edge to make sure that this bottom of the box is really horizontal. And I can line it up with the bottom. And I'm sure you guys are also noticing that my straight edge is not a ruler, it is just my oil pastel box. And I point that out just because if you're at home or wherever and you don't have a straight edge, you can usually find something that has a straight edge, even if you don't have a ruler or a protractor or one of those triangular things. I forget what those are called. So you want to kind of know, where these need to be, because as you can see, well, maybe you can't see that, but I actually put it in sort of the wrong place. So this is why you need to have your lines where you want them to be first before you do the straight edge. And so I'm doing that with all my lines, making sure that they are truly horizontal and truly vertical. So whenever you're working in one point perspective, your horizontals are truly horizontal, your verticals are truly vertical, and the only things that have angles are these right here, and these would go back to a vanishing point, wherever that might be. So it might be up here, it might even be, could be off your paper, it doesn't matter. Okay, all right. Are we good? Are we ready to move on? This is a great time to check and see if your notebook is synced, because we are going to start to get into stuff with a little bit more detail. Not a ton of detail right away, but if you're kind of waiting for other people to catch up, this is, because I see some people still making some adjustments. All right, you can also, if you're waiting here, this is a good time to get rid of some of these extra lines so that they're out of your way. So you often will start with kind of a sketchy line, or you just have marks that weren't quite where you wanted them to start out with, so we can now get rid of those. And I do purposely wait to get rid of those. I wait a little bit because sometimes the mistakes give you important information. If you erase your mistake and then redraw, you're often just redrawing incorrectly over and over. So you got to learn from your mistakes. So sometimes leaving those for a minute helps. All right, are you guys finding these syncing now if they weren't before? Okay. All right, so I'm going to start to, before we zoom in and do details, we have one other really big line here to do, which is going to be the table line. So I'm looking at where that visually touches the tissue box. So again, you're kind of measuring with your eyes. You're estimating, you're guesstimating, and you're thinking about where these visually connect. And then once you have that, you can go ahead, and this one, you could probably use your straight edge right away. So again, I know where I want that line to be, and I'm lining it up with the side of the page to make sure it's nice and straight. I don't want to make this super dark through here, but I could make that go through and then just erase it. All right, so all of these beginning lines, these should not be super dark. So if you've had trouble with your edges really popping out, that's one thing to change your approach to make your underdrawing, your original lines lighter. Heavy does not mean more precise or better. Okay, so now we're ready to deal with some of these details. So the first detail we are ready to do is this opening in the top of the box. All right, so what I want you to know about this, notice the space around it. This front area here is bigger than this back area, significantly, right? That's super important because just like with the cylinder, with the ellipse, we noticed how like the front half appeared bigger than the back half. If we were doing an aerial view, those would be equal, but in perspective, they're not. So it's really important that as we start to put this in, we account for that. This angle should be similar to this one. Technically, they would be slightly different because they'd be converging in. But if you draw them the same, that'll be fine visually. You don't want to draw it so that it looks like they would diverge. All right, those, I'm sorry, I didn't really say that right. But you wouldn't want this to go like farther this direction. If anything, it would go farther this direction. I don't know if I'm making that clear, but in any case, basically the same is fine. And then putting in the top of that. And you can also look at visually how wide is this space. All right, so I'm looking at the negative space. So right now, this is the thing I'm drawing, that's my positive space. But I'm looking at the space around it too to make sure that I get the thing I'm drawing right. And if you are starting to continue this line across, then you've got good instincts. We're not necessarily going to see completely this other side of it, but this is why I wanted to keep it pretty symmetrical, because if it's symmetrical, then this is symmetrical. All right, and that's going to be important later. So we've got that about where we want it to be. All right, so now we're going to go in and we're going to start to add the tissue. So again, we're going to go from big shapes to small shapes. So I'm going to start with, where do I think this is on that top plane of the box? Where does that connect? And I'm also going to look at, how high does this come up? All right, so I could even measure this and say, hey, how big is this in comparison, say, to the box? So you can use your measurement there and then be saying, okay, that maybe goes in 2 more times to the rest of the box. Let's see, which pencil was I using? I guess I was using this one. Okay. All right, so if I'm looking here, 1, 2, maybe even a little higher up, so maybe something like that. All right, and then I can bring this down kind of at an angle. So kind of drawing what I see here, bringing this up. I'll draw this a little bit darker, but I've got to fight my instinct to draw it really lightly right now, so you guys want to draw this really lightly. I'm coming up like so, and then that cuts in. We'll go back to that later. And then we've got this second triangle behind here. All right, so we've got kind of a basic shape. Don't stress out if you're not sure if it's perfect, because we're going to go back in and look at this a little bit more carefully and add more detail and make sure that we have this right. So I've roughed it in, okay? Have you guys roughed it in too? Okay, so go ahead and rough it in. All right, so I'm loosely drawing what I see, the basic shapes. I'm not going to try to make it perfect. I'm going to try, but I'm not going to stress if it's not perfect. We're going to do this quickly. All right, so 10 more seconds, rough it in, because then we're going to go back in and we're going to make it better. Again, this is why you want to use light lines. Oh, we do have 70 minutes today. I looked at that wrong. Hey, Wilson, we have 70 minutes today, not 50. All right. Okay, so I'm going to assume you got it roughed in. Now we're going to look at it in a little bit more detail. All right, so we're going to look at this, and we're going to look at this. First, we kind of saw this as one big angle. But when I look at it close up, I might actually have an angle there, and then an angle there, and then maybe even I see it do kind of an angle there. So you can start to put that in. I'm going to get rid of my purple line because it helps me illustrate it, but then it kind of obscures what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to try to add a little bit more detail to that. Okay, so that might change things a little bit. Moved it over a little bit for me. Maybe it did for you too, and that's fine. And then I'm going to come down the other side, and that's going to help me see, oh, this angle is steeper than I thought it was. All right, and again, in there I might have this, and then this, and then that. All right, so if you guys remember when we did the kind of swirly lines on the cylinder, we broke them down kind of into angles. Same kind of thing here. So these curves can be broken into angles. And I might also notice how far this is coming up above the opening of the tissue box here. So again, I'm looking at this kind of space in here. And I might go, oh, okay, how far does that come over and how low? Maybe that's a little lower than I thought at first. All right, and by the way, it does not have to be perfect this time either. All right, so then I'm coming up here, and if you zoom into this, you're gonna see that this is coming up from right inside the tissue box, right? And it's coming up right popping out from that corner. So we want to make sure that it looks like it's popping out from that corner, from inside that corner. So I'm using a darker pencil. It's harder to get that detail, but maybe I can switch now to a lighter pencil and you guys will be able to see. All right, so this should look like it's coming right from that corner in there. Getting a little bit closer up. Okay. Then I've got this line, and again, now I can look at how does this relate to the side of the box. So notice, where does this cross this side of the box? And then up here, we should have a little bit of the tissue box sticking out. So all of these are going to be clues to the size and the shape and the angles. So I've got to move mine down a little bit to have that relate correctly. All right, and then I said we were going to come back to this line in here. So in here, I can see that this is happening, and I can't really see it. It's almost invisible, but it's continuing here. So what's happening is that there's a fold in the tissue, and this fold is in front of this one back here in the same way that this fold, this plane, is in front of this one here. All right, so a tissue, it has form, and it's kind of like a mountain range. It's like the land. When the tectonic plates were shoving at each other, they're creating folds much like this tissue. All right. So I can draw that in there, and maybe this has a little bit more of like a rise and fall to it, so I can notice those details and try to mimic those a little bit. So maybe I'm doing that. All right, but I've got this basic thing in here. I can go back and I can tweak that later, but I've got this basic kind of form, and this is sticking up here. So then I've got this next part coming from behind it. So that's moving in a little bit. And again, I can notice what's happening there and then bring it, maybe change the angle a little bit. So I'm noticing where this visually connects to this. And then I'm looking at those angles. But these visual connections are really important. Those are describing the form. They're telling you what's happening with the form. All right, so then at this point, I can I've corrected some things, maybe I'm starting to erase some stuff that I don't need. All right, and we've got even more detail to put in here. All right, I don't need some of this stuff up here because this tissue is not see-through. All right, I still do need this line here. Okay, I don't need this line because this part of the tissue is not see-through, but then it continues over here. All right, so there's a part of the tissue we haven't drawn at all, and that's right here. And if you're looking at your up-close reference, so if you haven't gotten yours to sync yet and you're not looking at your up-close reference yet, do that now, switch over. Because there's this really little detail here where this goes over the edge of the tissue box. All right, so I'm going to draw that in to the best of my ability. Boop, over the edge, and then falling over it onto this front plane, and then up like so. And then this is going to connect to up here. where this flattens out at the top. All right, and we're going to then add more detail to that, but that's the basic shape that's happening. All right, and this line does basically stay here. It might actually rise up just a bit because we're not seeing the edge, we're seeing how the tissue goes over the edge, and the tissue has volume too. All right. All right, and now we can look at this even a little bit more carefully and go, oh, hey, wait a minute. This kind of folds over on itself there. Look, there's a little tiny triangle there. So I can draw that folding over on itself up to, say, here. All right, we're seeing a little bit. This changes the angle right there, and it's because here it's resting on that top plane, and then it's not. So it changes angles. And then here again at the top, we've got another little triangle where it folds over. And then here at the top, again, above that, we've got this little straight line, and then it's folding over again up here. So these are the details you're going to be looking at, and you're going to get those in based on what you see. Right? If I keep going down this slope, I have another little triangle right there where it's folding over. And I'm going to tell you something. What if you don't get these absolutely perfect? What if you draw these little folds and these angles and they're not quite perfect? They're not the right proportion. They're not the right size. Is it going to ruin your drawing? No, of course not, because it's a tissue. Every time I pull out a new tissue, it's going to fall a different way. It's going to look a different way. No one's going to be able to tell me, that tissue didn't look like that. But you put in those details, and it's going to look more realistic. And you're going to learn about form from it. So it's really important to draw what you see to the best of your ability, and not skip some of these details because you think, oh, I'm not going to get them right, they're too hard. That said, though, we didn't start with these details, did we? We did the big form. So that's the other thing. You want to go big forms and then add details, but you're not going to skip the details because that gives your drawing life. All right, so we've got a lot of details there. I think we're pretty good. And maybe I see one more. I see kind of a fold back here. I can kind of put that in lightly. And again, this has angles to it. So just because it's not a regular line doesn't mean it's curvy. All right, and later on when we shade, maybe we'll see even more things. But right now, I think that's pretty good. Okay. We're going to do this little area in here. And then all we'll have left will be shadows. So we might have to do the shadows next time. And then it's time to start shading. All right, so in here, we've got this cellophane. So we can see where this kind of comes out. And we've got sort of that front plane of it. So, and again, just do your best to draw what you see. Don't make it too curvy. Look for the angles. People tend to make a lot of things really curvy when actually they've got some angles to them. So look for those angles. And then I've got this kind of shape coming behind that and then maybe going down there. It's a little more detail to that maybe if I zoom in. But don't worry, you know, just again, just try to draw what you see. It doesn't matter if you get it exactly right. But do your best. And then I might even see sort of this middle layer again. So again, we have these like rises and falls. So we're seeing like one little mountain range come up in front of another little one. And honestly, this is very much what you're going to see when you are drawing ground. So this is why sometimes if you're trying to draw something that's supposed to be on ground, it looks like it's floating, because you need to put some of these like rises and falls there, and that'll help ground it. If that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it too much, but maybe in the future you'll use that skill. All right. Okay. Am I going too fast if we put in some shadows? These are going to be simpler. Okay, I think we can put in the shadows. So our first shadow, and I'm going to zoom out to do this. Yeah, that'll be okay. All right, so my first shadow is going to be the big one. So you're going to look, where does this attach to the tissue box? So there was my table line, and here's this one. And it's coming out basically flat, maybe a little bit of an angle, right? And then this is really important. This is going to go at an angle. So again, because 1 point perspective, the vanishing point is somewhere up here. This is on this flat surface. It's at an angle. And then we can connect that back over to here. If you think that's like too big or too small, I could go, oh, maybe I can make that bigger. But that's basically it. And you should be using light lines. Are my lines dark enough that you can see them? Okay, but definitely you want to keep them light because again, this has a soft edge. We don't want to have a permanent outline there. I am seeing a little bit of a shadow here as well. So starting here, coming out a little bit, maybe at an angle, maybe doing something like this over here. I even say, I think this is the shadow of the tissue, making kind of a funky shape. And then kind of coming over. So just like we had in this room, we had like multiple light sources. This was my desk at home during COVID, actually, during the lockdown in spring of 2020. So you can see I've got windows, so I've got some backlighting, but I've also got a lamp over here. So I've got some light from the side. So that's why we've got these multiple shadows. Okay, almost cleanup time, but I'm going to put in one more shadow. And that's this shadow of the tissue itself. So I can draw that coming out like so on this box and like so. So again, you just want to describe that to the best of your ability. Don't make it too dark because it's going to be a soft edge. All right. And then over here, we're going to have a little bit of a shadow underneath this as well. And again, soft edge. These are subtle. There's some other shadows here, but we'll get to those when we do the shading. All right, so we've got our basic thing. We're going to be ready to shade next time. So go ahead, flip this over, put your name on the back, put Cbell. All right. How are these going so far? Are these already the best tissue box drawing you've ever done in your entire life? Yeah. I can say that with confidence because I'm guessing most of you have not drawn a tissue box before. Has anyone drawn a tissue box before? Yeah.